Okay, so this one started simple. I was just thinking about vampires. The usual stuff. Fangs, coffins, Dracula, castles, capes. And then I asked a dumb question. Where did this actually come from? Not the movies, not the books. I mean, the fear. And that turned into a very long night. Because the vampire story doesn't start with Dracula. It doesn't start with Romania. It doesn't even start in Europe. It starts with something way more unsettling. The idea that the dead don't always stay dead, and sometimes they come back hungry. Not metaphorically, literally. Long before anyone uses the word vampire, almost every civilization on Earth already had stories about beings that fed on human life. Not just blood, life itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, there were spirits like Lamashtu and Lilitu. They were blamed for infant deaths, miscarriages, sudden illness. People believed they moved through the night feeding. In India, there were the Vitala, spirits that possessed corpses, hung from trees, whispered secrets, and walked around in dead bodies like clothing. In China, there's the Jiangshi, a stiff, hopping corpse that drained people's life energy. They believed rigor mortis made the body too stiff to walk, so it bounced. In Greece, there were the Vilolakas, reanimated dead that knocked on doors at night. If you answered, you were said to die soon after. In Slavic regions, the word upir or apir appears, basically an early version of vampire. These beings were said to rise from graves and attack the living. In parts of Africa, stories describe forests like the Asambosam, creatures with iron teeth that lived in trees and fed on humans. Different countries, different continents, different cultures, same idea. The dead don't stay gone. And here's the part that makes this all way more unsettling. Most vampire myths didn't come from imagination. They came from misunderstanding death. People didn't understand decomposition. So when they dug someone up and saw blood around the mouth, a bloated body, hair and nails that looked like they'd grown, strange sounds escaping the corpse, they didn't think natural processes. They thought, it's feeding, it's alive, it's coming back. In reality, gases push fluids out. Skin retracts, bloating happens, sounds happen. But without modern science, that looks like proof. So now we get to the part everyone thinks is the beginning. Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century ruler of Wallachia, which is part of modern-day Romania. He wasn't a vampire, but he was terrifying. Vlad became famous for impaling his enemies on wooden stakes, sometimes thousands at a time, and lining them up outside cities as a warning. Imagine riding into a town and seeing miles of bodies, still twitching. That kind of fear sticks. Stories spread, and over time, they get bigger, meaner, darker. Centuries later, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker comes along and writes a novel called Dracula. He borrows Vlad's name, Dracul, which meant dragon or devil, and attaches it to something much older. The ancient idea that the dead can return, that they can feed, that they can hide among us. Dracula didn't invent the vampire. He standardized it. He gave it a face, a castle, a cape, a personality. Vlad didn't create vampires. He became their brand, the human symbol of something that had already haunted us for thousands of years. But then, something shifts. In 1922, a silent film comes out in Germany called Nosferatu. And this vampire doesn't look like Dracula. He isn't charming. He isn't elegant. He isn't seductive. He looks sick, bald, gaunt, long claws, rat-like teeth. more corpse than man. And that wasn't an accident. Nosferatu was released just after World War I, and right after the Spanish flu pandemic. Millions of people had just died. Entire cities had been devastated. So suddenly, the vampire isn't romantic anymore. He's a disease. In the film, Nosferatu doesn't just kill people. He brings plague. Rats swarm the streets. Coffins pile up. Whole towns fall silent. This version of the vampire isn't about immortality. It's about contagion and invisible death. About the fear that something could enter your home quietly and wipe out your entire family. And when you look back at the earliest vampire stories, that's what they always were. Not romance, not seduction, but unexplained death. By the time you get to the 1700s, something really strange has happened. Vampires aren't just stories anymore. They're a problem. A thing that towns believe they're actively dealing with. In parts of Eastern Europe, Serbia, Hungary, Romania, people began reporting something terrifying. They said the dead were coming back. Not as ghosts, as bodies. Villagers claimed that recently buried people were leaving their graves at night, visiting family members, sitting on their chests, and making them sick. Then people would start dying. So local officials would get involved. And I don't mean priests or storytellers. I mean government authorities. They would exhume the bodies. And what they found looked like proof. The corpses were bloated. The skin looked stretched. There was blood at the mouth. Sometimes the nails and hair appeared longer. So they did what they believed you were supposed to do. They drove stakes through the chest. They cut off heads. They burned hearts. And here's the part that always gets me. This wasn't folklore. This was paperwork. There are real, preserved government documents describing these procedures like pest control, not monsters. Public safety. And then this fear crossed the ocean. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, New England experienced its own vampire hysteria. Rhode Island, Vermont, Connecticut, families noticed a pattern. One person would get sick, then another, then another. They'd start coughing blood, growing weaker, wasting away. Today, we know what this was, tuberculosis. But back then, they believed the first person who died was feeding on the rest. So they did what they thought you were supposed to do. They dug them up. In some cases, they found the heart still looked solid. That was considered proof. So they removed it, burned it, and sometimes mixed the ashes into medicine for the sick. Parents did this. Doctors allowed it. Communities supported it. No one thought this was insane. They thought it was survival. And when you step back and look at it, something becomes clear. Vampire stories always explode during pandemics. Plagues, cholera, tuberculosis, unknown illnesses. When people don't understand what's killing them, they look for intention. A monster is easier to understand than randomness. And vampires are perfect. They look human. They move like us. They used to be one of us. That makes them personal. So by the time we reach the modern era, something interesting should have happened. We understand death now. We understand disease. We understand decomposition. So vampires should have disappeared. They didn't. They adapted. And nowhere embraces this more openly than New Orleans. New Orleans doesn't treat the paranormal like a joke. It treats it like weather. Like it's just part of the environment. There are people there who openly identify as vampires. Not metaphorically. Literally. Some say they feed on energy. Some say they feed on small amounts of blood. Some say they've been this way their whole lives. There are underground communities, rules, ethics, consent systems. They don't call it hunting. They call it participation. And then there are the stories. Bartenders who swear certain people never age. Locals who avoid certain streets late at night. Tour guides who lower their voices when they say specific names. Are these just stories? Probably. But that's what they've always been. Until they weren't. Every culture has its version. New Orleans just says it out loud. And this is why I stopped trying to explain it and start asking the questions. What if vampires never disappeared? What if they just stopped looking like monsters? What if they learned to blend in? What if ancient cultures weren't all imagining the same thing, but describing it differently? What if it was never about blood? What if it was about something else? Energy, illness, influence, presence. What if every era just gives it new clothes? Because vampires aren't really about blood. They're about fear of death, fear of disease, fear of being drained, fear of being watched, fear of losing control. And that fear never goes away. Every generation just redesigns it. So yeah, maybe vampires aren't real, but people have been acting like they are for thousands of years. And that kind of belief doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from experience, from fear, from moments we couldn't explain. And maybe some of those moments still haven't been. This is Joshua Tree Encounters, where UFOs, cryptids, and strangeness collide.